They didn't reject her because she was unworthy. They rejected her because bonding with her meant never belonging to yourself again. The Hall of Virex Station was designed to impress species that measured power in different ways, which meant the gravity felt a fraction too heavy, the lights just slightly too precise, and the silence carried like it had somewhere important to be. 12 alien males stood in a perfect arc before Commander Lyra Vera, each one selected for status, strength, or lineage. 12 proposals had been offered. 12 had been refused. Not by her. By them. The final refusal settled into the room like dust that refused to move. No one spoke. Even the translation field seemed to hesitate, as if unsure how to process something so culturally inconvenient. Lyra stood at the center of it all, posture flawless, expression controlled, long silver-toned ears angled forward in a way that suggested attention without vulnerability. She looked, to human standards, almost calm. To everyone else in the room, she looked untouchable. That was the problem. Bonding with her species wasn't symbolic. It wasn't romantic. It was absolute. Shared command authority. Shared neural link. Shared consequences. For most, it was less a partnership and more a permanent surrender. One by one, the candidates had realized that and chosen safety over legend. The council members shifted subtly, their discomfort carefully disguised as procedural patience. Somewhere along the edge of the chamber, a hovering console adjusted its position, as if trying to escape the moment. And then, because the universe occasionally enjoys poor timing, Ethan Cole walked in carrying a diagnostic tablet and a mild sense of confusion. He paused just inside the threshold, blinking once at the arrangement of high-ranking figures and the kind of silence that suggested he had entered a room that already had enough problems. "I'm looking for docking lane calibration reports," he said, because it seemed like the sort of sentence that belonged anywhere. No one answered. A few heads turned. Most did not. Ethan glanced around, then at the nearest empty seat, then back at his tablet, as if hoping it would offer guidance. It did not. So he did what humans often do in the absence of better information. He moved forward and sat down. The chair adjusted itself beneath him with a polite hum, clearly not designed for someone with his posture, but willing to compromise. That was when Lyra looked at him. Not the way she had looked at the others. Not evaluating. Not dismissing. Simply looking. Ethan noticed, because it is difficult not to notice when the most significant person in a room directs their attention at you like you've just interrupted something important. He gave a small, apologetic half-smile. "If this is assigned seating, I can relocate," he said quietly. Her ears shifted, a subtle movement that translated somewhere between curiosity and something less defined. "You are not assigned," she replied, voice low, controlled, carrying the kind of authority that did not need to raise itself. "Great," Ethan said, settling in a fraction more comfortably. "I was hoping to avoid standing awkwardly for the next 5 minutes." Around them, the room did not relax. If anything, it tightened. The absence of fear in his voice moved through the chamber like a small disturbance in still water. He didn't know who she was. That much was obvious. He didn't understand what had just happened. That was even more obvious. Lyra studied him for a moment longer than protocol required. "You entered during a formal selection process," she said. Ethan nodded once. "I gathered that from the silence. It's very structured." One corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. "And you are unconcerned," she observed. Ethan considered that. "I try not to be concerned about things I don't understand yet," he said. "It's a short list if I do." A pause. Not empty. Charged. The kind that built rather than waited. For the first time that day, something in Lyra's posture shifted, not softened, not lowered, just recalibrated. "That is an unusual strategy," she said. "It saves time," Ethan replied. "Also prevents me from making decisions based on bad information." The translation field rendered his words perfectly, and for a fraction of a second, the room forgot to breathe. Because in a hall where 12 had chosen distance, one human had chosen proximity without realizing what it cost. And Lyra, who had been refused by all, found herself facing the only man who hadn't even thought to refuse her. The silence did not break. It adjusted, like the room had decided to study Ethan Cole instead of ignoring him. Across the chamber, one of the council members shifted in his seat, the movement small but deliberate, the kind that meant protocol had just been violated in a way no one had prepared a response for. Ethan noticed the shift the way he noticed most things, half a second too late, and with just enough awareness to be mildly concerned. He leaned slightly closer to Lyra, lowering his voice as if they were discussing something as ordinary as docking schedules. "So, just to confirm," he said quietly, "did I interrupt something important or extremely important?" Her gaze remained on him, steady, unreadable to anyone who did not understand the subtle language of her species. Her ears tilted a fraction inward, then stilled. "Both," she replied. Ethan nodded once, accepting that answer with surprising ease. "Good to know. I will aim for extremely apologetic then." Around them, the translation field processed every word with perfect clarity, which was unfortunate for everyone else in the room. A faint ripple moved through the gathered delegates, not loud enough to qualify as conversation, but enough to signal that something was happening that did not belong in the official script. Lyra did not look away from him. "You are human," she said, not as a question. "Last time I checked," Ethan replied. "Although this feels like the kind of situation where that might become negotiable." Another pause followed, but this one felt different. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence from before. It was thinner, sharper, like tension being pulled into a single point. "You entered without hesitation," Lyra continued. "I did not realize hesitation was required," Ethan said. "The door was open. That usually means someone forgot to close it. That earned something. Not a smile, not exactly, but a shift so subtle most of the room missed it. The angle of her posture softened by a degree, the rigid precision easing just enough to suggest interest rather than assessment. 12 candidates understood what this moment required," she said. Ethan glanced briefly at the empty space in front of her, the absence of anyone standing there now suddenly more noticeable than the presence of the crowd. "And they all decided it was not worth it," he said. "It was not a judgment. It was an observation. That difference mattered. They decided it was not survivable," Lyra corrected. Ethan considered that, tapping the edge of his tablet lightly against his palm. "That sounds like a strong opinion," he said. "Usually means there is a story behind it." Her ears angled forward again. Sharper this time. "There is," she said. "And you are not concerned." Ethan exhaled slowly, glancing around the room as if checking whether anyone else planned to explain the situation to him. No one did. "Of course not. I am starting to be," he admitted. "But I am also already sitting here, so it feels inefficient to panic now." Somewhere behind him, a console emitted a soft, uncertain tone, like it had just encountered a variable it could not categorize. Lyra took a single step closer. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. The movement alone was enough to shift the entire atmosphere of the chamber. People noticed. They always noticed when she chose proximity. Ethan noticed too, mostly because she was now standing close enough that he could see the faint, almost metallic sheen beneath her skin, the subtle difference that marked her as something more than human. "You do not understand what was offered here," she said. "That is becoming increasingly clear," Ethan replied. "But I am guessing it was not a group discount." For a fraction of a second, the corner of her mouth moved again. This time it stayed. Not fully, not openly, but enough. The room felt it. The change was small, but it carried weight, like the first shift before something irreversible. "No," she said softly. "It was not." Another step closer. Now there was no distance left that could be called accidental. "And yet," she continued, her voice lowering just enough that the translation field seemed to hesitate before following, "you chose to sit beside me." Ethan met her gaze, steady, calm in the way of someone who had not yet realized the scale of what he had stepped into. "I chose the only empty seat," he said. "That is usually how these things work." The silence returned, but it was no longer neutral. It leaned. It listened. And somewhere deep within the station systems, something ancient and procedural began to wake, as if a condition long unmet had just quietly been satisfied. The station did not announce what it was doing, which was how Ethan knew something important had started. The lights did not flicker, not exactly, but they adjusted in a way that felt too intentional to be routine, as if the entire structure had decided to pay closer attention. A low, almost polite hum spread through the chamber floor, subtle enough that most would ignore it, but not subtle enough to be accidental. Ethan glanced down briefly, then back at Lyra. "Please tell me that is not because of me," he said. Lyra did not answer immediately. That alone was new. Her gaze shifted past him, not to the council, not to the delegates, but to something unseen, something layered deeper into the station's systems. Her ears moved again, this time not toward him, but outward, as if receiving a signal. That depends, she said quietly, on whether you intend to remain where you are. Ethan followed her line of sight, which was difficult because there was nothing visible to follow. I was planning on staying seated, he said. It seemed like the safest option so far. A soft tone echoed through the chamber, not loud, not intrusive, but precise, like a notification that expected to be understood. Above them, a thin band of light formed in the air, geometric and clean, projecting symbols that did not belong to any active interface. They hovered for a moment, then shifted, aligning themselves into a pattern that made several of the alien delegates visibly tense. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, squinting up at the projection. Okay, he said under his breath. That feels less normal. No one corrected him. No one explained. The silence that followed was no longer social. It was procedural. Lyra stepped closer again, her presence now fully occupying his immediate space, her attention no longer divided. You should not move, she said. Ethan nodded once. That was already the plan. The symbols above them pulsed softly, then expanded, forming a layered structure of light that resembled an ancient system interface rather than a modern display. The translation field hesitated before rendering the output, as if it had not been used for this particular function in a very long time. When it did, the words appeared slowly, deliberately. Protocol status, dormant. Condition, unmet. Ethan read it once, then again, his expression shifting from confusion to something more focused. That seems like a problem someone else should handle, he said. The symbols flickered, then stabilized. Condition updated. Proximity, confirmed. Compatibility, analyzing. This time, the reaction in the room was impossible to ignore. Several delegates stood abruptly. A guard near the far wall took a step forward, then stopped as if reminded of a rule he could not override. Ethan glanced around, then back at Lyra. I feel like I just triggered something, he said. Yes, she replied. You did. Her voice had changed. Not in tone, not in volume, but in weight. It carried something new now, something that had not been present before. Recognition, perhaps, but not the kind that came from memory. The kind that came from alignment. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, careful, controlled. Is this the part where someone tells me what is happening, he asked, or do we all find out together? Lyra's eyes held his, steady, searching, as if confirming something she did not fully trust yet. This system, she said slowly, has not activated in over 2 centuries. Ethan exhaled softly. That seems like a strong indicator I should not be involved. The symbols above them pulsed again, brighter this time, more defined. Compatibility, verified. Initiating bond sequence. The words settled into the air with quiet certainty. No alarm followed. No warning. Just confirmation. The kind that did not ask for permission. The room did not erupt. It did not panic. It simply stopped, every movement suspended, every voice held back, as if the entire station had collectively decided that this moment required stillness. Ethan looked up at the projection, then back at Lyra, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. I am going to assume, he said carefully, that this is not standard seating protocol. Lyra stepped even closer, close enough now that there was no space left for misunderstanding, her voice lowering just enough to belong only to him. No, she said, this is not standard. Another pulse of light, another shift in the air, and somewhere beyond the visible systems, something ancient completed its awakening, recognizing not just presence, but permission. The system did not rush, which made it worse, because whatever it was doing had already decided it would not be interrupted. The light above Ethan and Lyra shifted from symbols into structure, forming concentric layers that rotated slowly, each ring aligning with a precision that felt less like computation and more like recognition. Ethan watched it the way one watches something that is both fascinating and mildly concerning, his expression steady, his posture deliberately unchanged. I feel like I should say something intelligent right now, he said quietly. But I am working with limited data. Lyra did not look at the projection anymore. She was watching him. That, more than anything, changed the weight of the moment. Her ears remained angled forward, not rigid, not defensive, but fully engaged, as if every subtle movement he made carried information she was trying to understand. "You are not reacting the way others would," she said. Ethan considered that, then gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. "Others seem to have had more context," he replied. "I walked in looking for maintenance reports." The system pulsed again, brighter this time, and the air between them grew denser, not physically, but perceptually, like the space itself had decided to narrow its focus. Across the chamber, one of the senior council members finally found his voice, though it came out lower than expected. "Commander Vera," he said carefully, "the protocol should not be active." Lyra did not turn. "And yet," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, "it is." That ended the discussion before it could begin. Authority, in that moment, did not come from rank. It came from alignment with something older than the council itself. Ethan glanced over his shoulder briefly, catching the tension in the room, the way trained individuals were choosing stillness over interference. "That is usually not a good sign," he murmured, "when everyone agrees to pretend this is normal." The projection shifted again, the outer rings locking into place while a new layer formed at the center, a single line of light that extended downward, stopping just short of where he sat. It did not touch him. It did not need to. Identification, Ethan Cole. The translation field rendered it with crisp clarity. Ethan blinked once. "Well," he said, "that feels personal." The line flickered, then expanded, drawing in additional data that did not display, only processed. Lyra stepped even closer, her presence now unmistakably deliberate, no longer reactive, no longer observational. "You should not have been recognized," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a recalculation. Ethan met her gaze, steady, grounded in the same quiet logic that had carried him this far. "I am generally easy to overlook," he said. "It is one of my better skills." For the first time, her composure shifted more than a fraction. Not outwardly, not enough for the room to see, but enough that the space between them felt different, less formal, more direct. "Not here," she said. The system pulsed. Again, and this time the words formed faster, as if the process had moved beyond uncertainty. "Status, compatibility confirmed. Authorization, mutual." Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, the kind of breath that comes when something crosses from confusing into unavoidable. "Mutual," he repeated quietly. "That sounds like I agreed to something." Lyra's eyes did not leave his. "You did," she said, "when you chose to remain." Another pulse, deeper now, resonating through the floor, through the structure, through something unseen that responded not to commands, but to conditions. Ethan leaned back slightly, not retreating, just adjusting to the realization that the situation had moved beyond anything he could casually dismiss. "That seems like an important detail I missed," he said. "It was not available to you," Lyra replied. "It is now." The final layer of the projection formed above them, locking into place with a precision that felt absolute. Initiation ready. A pause followed, but it was not hesitation. It was confirmation, the system waiting not for permission, but for presence. Ethan looked at the words, then back at Lyra, his voice quieter now, not uncertain, just more focused. "If I ask what happens next," he said, "am I going to like the answer?" For the first time since the system activated, Lyra's expression softened, not in weakness, but in honesty. "That depends," she said, "on whether you intended to stay." The silence that followed did not belong to the room anymore. It belonged to him. He did not answer immediately, which was the first time Ethan Cole had hesitated since walking into the room, and the system noticed, not by changing, but by waiting with a patience that felt intentional. The light above them held steady, the words "initiation ready" suspended in perfect alignment, as if the entire station had decided that this moment belonged to him alone. Ethan looked at it, then back at Lyra, his expression quieter now, not confused, not overwhelmed, just thinking. "I chose a chair," he said finally. "I did not realize I was choosing anything else." Lyra did not step back. If anything, she moved a fraction closer, close enough that the space between them no longer felt like distance, but like a boundary that had already been crossed. "Choice does not require understanding," she said. "Only intent." Ethan let out a slow breath, the kind that comes when a situation refuses to simplify itself. "That feels like a rule people usually mention earlier," he replied. "Around them, The chamber remained frozen in a state of observation. No one interrupted. No one moved forward. Whatever authority had governed this room before had quietly stepped aside for something older, something that did not ask permission from councils or protocols. Ethan glanced once more at the projection, then back at Lyra, his voice steady. "If I stand up right now," he said, "does this stop?" The question did not sound like fear. It sounded like procedure. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "No," she said. "It does not." A small pause followed, not dramatic, not heavy, just honest. "Then I suppose that option is off the table," Ethan murmured. The system responded, not to his words, but to the shift in his posture, the subtle stillness that replaced uncertainty. The light above them pulsed once, deeper than before, and the final sequence began to form. Parameters locked. Link pathway established. Ethan read it, his brow tightening slightly. "That sounds permanent," he said. "It is," Lyra replied. There was no hesitation in her voice now. No distance. Just clarity. For the first time, Ethan's humor did not arrive immediately. It took a second longer, a small delay that spoke more than any reaction. "I should probably ask what I am agreeing to," he said. "You should," Lyra answered. "Will it change anything?" he asked. Another pause, but this one was different. Softer. More human, in a way that did not belong to her species but had found its way there anyway. "No," she said. That landed quietly, but it landed hard. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not at the title, not at the presence, but at the person standing in front of him, the one who had been refused by everyone else, not because she lacked value, but because she required it. He exhaled slowly, then gave a small, almost resigned nod. "All right," he said. "Then I will stay." The moment the words settled, the system responded. Not with noise, not with alarm, with completion. Initiation confirmed. The light above them descended, not touching, not overwhelming, but aligning, connecting 2 points that had not been meant to meet and deciding that they would anyway. Across the chamber, the first reaction finally broke through the stillness, a sharp intake of breath from someone who understood exactly what had just happened. Ethan felt it then, not as pressure, not as force, but as presence, something vast and structured recognizing him, not asking who he was, but accepting that he was here. He glanced at Lyra, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "I am going to assume this is the part where things get complicated." For the first time since the process began, Lyra's expression shifted fully, not restrained, not calculated, but real. "No," she said softly. "This is the part where they become irreversible." And in that moment, with the system complete and the silence shattered into meaning, the entire chamber understood something Ethan had only just begun to realize. He had not been chosen by her. He had been chosen with her. The system did not fade after completion. It settled, like something ancient had finished a long calculation and was now quietly observing the result it had created. The light above them stabilized into a steady glow, no longer searching, no longer processing, simply present, like a signature that could not be erased. Ethan remained where he was, shoulders relaxed, breathing even. The only visible sign that anything had changed was the way his focus sharpened, as if he could feel something just beyond the edge of his awareness. "All right," he said slowly. "I can confirm that something definitely happened." Around them, the chamber finally began to move again, but carefully, cautiously, like people stepping onto a surface they were no longer sure would hold. Voices did not rise, but they returned in fragments, low murmurs layered with disbelief. One of the council members stood, his expression controlled but no longer neutral. "Commander Vera," he said, more firmly now, "this bond cannot be recognized without formal review." Lyra did not turn to him. She did not need to. "It already has been," she replied. The man hesitated, then pressed forward anyway, because protocol demanded resistance even when reality disagreed. "The system may have activated, but that does not grant. It grants exactly what it was designed to grant," Lyra interrupted, her tone still calm, but carrying a finality that made the rest of his sentence unnecessary. Ethan glanced between them, following the exchange with the quiet attention of someone who had unintentionally become central to a conversation he did not fully understand. "I am getting the impression," he said, "that I just skipped several steps in a very important process." No one corrected him. That was answer enough. Lyra shifted slightly, turning toward him now, her attention returning fully, the rest of the room becoming secondary again. You did not skip them, she said. You fulfilled them. Ethan let that settle for a second, then nodded once. That feels like a distinction with consequences, he said. It does. The system pulsed once more, softer this time, as if acknowledging the exchange. A new line of text appeared briefly above them before fading into the background, not for display, but for record. Status, link stable. Ethan noticed it anyway. He seemed to notice things he was not supposed to. Stable is good, he murmured. I like stable. Lyra's gaze remained steady, but there was something else there now, something that had not existed before the bond completed. Not curiosity, not evaluation, recognition, not of who he was, but of what he now represented. You are connected to me, she said. That sounds like something I should have signed paperwork for, Ethan replied. For a moment, there was no response from the room, no interruption, no challenge. Just the quiet realization spreading through every observer that the situation had moved beyond negotiation. One of the guards lowered his stance, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. The council member who had spoken before sat back down, not because he agreed, but because there was nothing left to argue against. The system had already made its decision. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, then looked at Lyra again, his voice softer now, more grounded. So what changes? He asked. Lyra studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much of the truth to give at once. Everything, she said. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet breath that carried acceptance rather than resistance. All right, he said. Then we should probably figure out what that means before someone writes it down incorrectly. For the first time since the bond finalized, a faint, unmistakable expression touched Lyra's face, not restrained, not hidden, but present. Not amusement exactly, but something close enough to feel like it. It will not be written incorrectly, she said. It will be recorded exactly as it occurred. Ethan nodded once, then leaned back slightly, looking around the chamber with new awareness, as if seeing it for the first time through a different lens. That is good, he said, because I am still trying to understand how sitting in the wrong chair turned into this. Lyra followed his gaze briefly, then returned to him, her voice quieter now, but carrying more weight than before. You did not sit in the wrong place, she said. You sat where no one else would. The words settled between them, simple, direct, and far more significant than they appeared. And in the silence that followed, the entire chamber understood that this was no longer about protocol, or selection, or even the bond itself. It was about the fact that when everyone else had stepped away, one human had remained. And the system had decided that was enough. The chamber did not return to normal, it recalibrated around them, like reality itself had accepted a new center and was quietly adjusting its expectations. Conversations resumed in fragments, but none of them touched the space where Ethan and Lyra stood, as if an invisible boundary had been drawn that no one was willing to cross without invitation. Ethan noticed that first. He always noticed patterns before meaning. They are giving us space, he said, glancing around the room where people now stood a careful distance away, their attention fixed but restrained. Lyra followed his gaze briefly, then returned to him, her voice even. They are recognizing jurisdiction. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds official. It is, she replied, and inconvenient for them. That earned a small breath of amusement from him, quiet and controlled. I have a talent for that, he said. The system above them dimmed slightly, no longer the focus of the moment, but still present, still watching in the way systems did when their work was complete but not yet tested. A soft line of light traced briefly along the floor between them, then vanished, like a reminder that the connection was not theoretical. Ethan felt it again then, clearer this time, not as pressure or sound, but as alignment, like two signals that had found the same frequency without trying. He frowned slightly, then relaxed when it did not escalate. Okay, he said under his breath. That is new. Lyra observed him closely. You can feel it, she said. It was not a question. Ethan nodded once. I can feel something, he admitted. It is not uncomfortable, just present. Her ears shifted subtly, angling toward him with a focus that was no longer guarded. It will become clearer, she said. That is both reassuring and slightly concerning, he replied. Around them, the council members had begun to reorganize, not to intervene, but to adapt. One of them activated a private channel, speaking in low tones that did not quite hide the urgency. Another adjusted a projection, likely reviewing laws that had not been relevant in a very long time. Ethan watched it all with a quiet curiosity, then looked back at Lyra. "So this changes your situation," he said. "Significantly," she answered. "I was previously unbound." He nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I am not," she said. There was no hesitation in it. No regret. Just fact. Ethan absorbed that, then glanced once more at the room that had been prepared to watch her be refused again. "They are not going to like that," he said. "No," Lyra agreed. "They will not." A pause followed, but it was not uncomfortable. It was measured, deliberate, like both of them were adjusting to a shared reality that had arrived without warning. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, then rested his hands against the edge of the chair, grounding himself in something familiar. "All right," he said. "Then I should probably understand what I am now." Lyra stepped closer, not to close distance, but to define it, her presence now fully aligned with his in a way that made the rest of the chamber irrelevant. "You are recognized," she said. "By the system, by the bond, and by extension, by me." Ethan held her gaze, steady, considering. "That sounds like more responsibility than I was scheduled for today," he said. A faint change touched her expression again, subtle but unmistakable. "You were not scheduled," she said. "You were selected." The words settled between them with quiet weight. Ethan did not react immediately. He let it sit, turning it over in the same careful way he approached unfamiliar problems. "That implies intention," he said. "Yes," Lyra replied. "Whose?" Her eyes did not waver. "Not mine alone." The implication was clear, even if the explanation was not. Ethan exhaled slowly, then gave a small nod, accepting the answer without fully understanding it. "All right," he said. "Then I guess the next step is figuring out what happens when everyone else realizes this is not temporary." Lyra turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping the chamber where realization was already taking hold, spreading from one observer to another like a quiet signal. "They already have," she said. And in that moment, as the weight of that truth settled into the room, the distance between Ethan Cole and the rest of the station became something more than physical. It became defined. The realization did not spread loudly. It settled, quiet and irreversible, like a verdict no one had voted on, but everyone understood. Across the chamber, conversations did not resume fully. They shifted direction, bending away from speculation and toward acceptance, because whatever had just occurred was no longer theoretical. It had already been recorded. Ethan could feel that without being told. Not in words, not in data, but in the way the space around him behaved, like the station itself had adjusted his position in its internal map. He leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms against his knees, grounding himself in something physical while everything else refused to stay simple. "So this is real," he said quietly. Lyra did not hesitate. "Yes." No elaboration. No reassurance. Just truth. He nodded once, absorbing that in the same steady way he had handled everything else so far. "All right," he said. "Then I should probably stop treating it like a misunderstanding." That earned a subtle shift in her expression, not quite approval, but recognition of the adjustment. Around them, one of the senior delegates stepped forward at last, not aggressively, but with the careful precision of someone who understood they were approaching something that could not be undone. "Commander Vera," he began, his tone measured. "This outcome will have implications across multiple systems." Lyra turned her head just enough to acknowledge him, but her attention did not leave Ethan. "It already does," she replied. The delegate paused, recalibrating his approach. "Then we must request clarification regarding the human status." Ethan glanced over at that, then back to Lyra. "That seems fair," he said. "I would also like clarification regarding my status." A faint ripple moved through the room. Not quite humor, not quite tension, but something in between. The recognition that the human at the center of an irreversible bond was still speaking like a man who had shown up for a routine shift. Lyra studied him for a moment longer, then spoke, her voice carrying just enough to reach the chamber without losing its focus. "His status is defined," she said. "He is bound." The word landed cleanly, without decoration, without negotiation. The delegate inclined his head slightly, accepting the answer even as it complicated everything. Then, by extension, he continued, He holds position relative to your command. Lyra's ears angled slightly, a sign not of uncertainty, but of precision. Correct. Ethan exhaled softly. I am going to need a simpler version of that, he said. Lyra looked at him directly. You are not outside my authority anymore, she said. He nodded slowly. That tracks, he replied. I have definitely been pulled into something. A brief pause followed. Then he added, just to clarify, is this a shared authority situation or more of a one-way arrangement? That question shifted something again, not in the room, but between them. Lyra did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, reducing the distance to something intentional, something that no longer allowed for detachment. It is mutual, she said. Ethan held her gaze, steady, measuring. Mutual, he repeated. So, I am not just assigned. No, she said. You are linked. The word carried more weight than anything else she had said so far. Not louder, not sharper, just deeper, like it connected to something beyond language. Ethan felt that, the same subtle alignment that had been building since the system activated, now clearer, more defined. He straightened slightly, not in tension, but in awareness. All right, he said quietly. Then I should probably act like that matters. Lyra's expression shifted again, this time unmistakably, a small but definite softening that did not reduce her authority, but refined it, making it more focused, more personal. It does, she said. Across the chamber, the final layer of resistance faded. No one stepped forward again. No one challenged the outcome. Because at this point, it was no longer about whether this should have happened. It was about what it meant that it had. And at the center of it, without ceremony, without preparation, a human who had come looking for maintenance reports now stood as something the system had not recognized in centuries. Not an exception, not an error, but a result. And for the first time since the process began, Ethan Cole was no longer just reacting to the situation. He was beginning to understand that he was part of it. The room did not applaud. It did not react in any way that humans would recognize as celebration. But something far more significant happened instead. The resistance ended, completely, and without announcement, like a decision had been reached by forces no one in the chamber outranked. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the shift in attention, the recalibration of every gaze, every posture, every silent calculation now placing him differently than before, not as an outsider who had wandered in, but as a variable that had already been accepted into the equation. He stood slowly, not because anyone asked him to, but because remaining seated no longer felt accurate to the moment. The chair adjusted as he moved, almost reluctantly, as if it too had recognized that its role was finished. All right, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. This is definitely not a normal day. Lyra watched him rise, her expression steady, but there was no distance left in it now, no barrier between observation and acknowledgement. She did not step back. She did not create space. She remained exactly where she was, as if his movement did not require adjustment, only alignment. No, she said. It is not. Across the chamber, the senior delegate inclined his head, not in submission, but in formal recognition, the kind reserved for moments that would be recorded and referenced long after everyone present was gone. Then it is concluded, he said. No one disagreed. No one needed to. Ethan glanced toward him, then back at Lyra, processing that single sentence with more weight than anything else that had been said so far. Concluded, he repeated. That sounds final. It is, Lyra replied. There was no hesitation left in her voice, no uncertainty, only clarity that had fully settled into place. Ethan exhaled slowly, then gave a small nod, accepting that in the same quiet way he had accepted everything else, not because he fully understood it, but because resisting it no longer made sense. All right, he said. Then I guess we move forward. Lyra studied him for a moment, not evaluating, not testing, just confirming that the person standing in front of her was the same one who had chosen to stay when everyone else had stepped away. Yes, she said. We do. The system above them dimmed further, its purpose fulfilled, its presence no longer required to prove what had already been established. But even as the light faded, the connection remained, subtle and constant, like a quiet line drawn between them that neither distance nor distraction could erase. Ethan felt it again, clearer now, not unfamiliar anymore, just there. He glanced at Lyra, his voice lower, more grounded than before. I am starting to understand why they said this was not survivable, he said. Lyra's ears shifted slightly, a small movement that carried meaning he was beginning to recognize. And yet, she said. Ethan gave a faint smile, not confident, not uncertain, just honest. And yet I am still here. For a brief moment, something unguarded passed through her expression, not weakening her presence, but refining it, making it sharper, more focused, more real. Yes, she said softly. You are. Around them, the chamber resumed its function, but not its previous state. Nothing had been undone, nothing reset. The world had not changed. It had adjusted, and at the center of that adjustment stood a human who had not been chosen by power, by status, or by design, but by something far more precise. Ethan looked around once more, taking in the room that had become quieter, more ordered, more aware, then returned his attention to Lyra. So what happens next? He asked. Lyra met his gaze, steady, unwavering, her voice carrying the same calm authority, but now anchored to something shared. Now, she said, they learn what this means. The words settled into the space between them, not as a question, not as a warning, but as the beginning of something that had not yet been defined. And for the first time since he had walked into the room, Ethan Cole understood one thing clearly. Whatever came next was not something he would face alone.